quintessential multiplayer shooter from my childhood. I know there were other multiplayer first-person shooters that came before it, like Doom and ultimately Quake, both of which could be played online. But remember, this was back in the mid-90s, and not everyone had access to this sort of gaming. The main source of multiplayer entertainment came in the form of split-screen gaming, which had been introduced in the 16-bit era, but really took off with the Nintendo 64. Up to 4 players could fight each other on the same screen at once. Now today, no one wants to be playing like this. All you need is a wireless router and an internet-capable gaming console, and you can play online with hundreds of players. But for me, the ultimate testament to how good your first-person shooting skills were would be demonstrated through a multiplayer round of GoldenEye. Hey, for my bachelor party, guess what I was playing? Yep, one-shot kills with the rocket launcher. That's an intense match. I'm surprised that after all this time, they haven't re-released this title with online capability. But that doesn't even interest me, because watching one of your friends go down in a puddle of their own blood while they're in the same room is completely satisfying. And for added insult, you continue to shoot their lifeless corpses as they respond. With the release of the GoldenEye film, there was a slew of James Bond merchandise, and the game started pouring in. After the success of the Nintendo 64 game, more interactive titles would follow, including one for each of the Pierce Brosnan movies. Pierce Brosnan would become the dominant face of James Bond throughout the remainder of the 90s. They would even use his likeness in games that weren't based on the films, like in Everything or Nothing, which is probably the most ambitious title. Aside from Pierce Brosnan, they also got a hold of Judi Dench, Shannon Elizabeth, and, get this, Richard Kiel, reprising the role of Jaws. Bond was everywhere, but GoldenEye probably had the most influence. After the N64 title, there came GoldenEye Rogue Agent, where Bond had to go against an alliance forged between Aura Goldfinger and Dr. No. And more recently, there was a reimagining of the original GoldenEye on the Wii, where Pierce Brosnan was replaced with Fray. Not my personal preference, but it actually followed the plot of the movie in much more detail. It was a blast to play. This one did have online support, but I don't know. It feels too Call of Duty-ish. No, split-screen 4-player was the only way you could play this game to do it justice. And just for shits and giggles, GoldenEye was re-released yet again on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, which was basically an enhanced remake of the Wii version. I haven't played them yet, but I don't think I could go near it without the use of the Wii Zapper. But I'm getting off track. This isn't a game review, this is a movie review of the 17th Bond film. As much as I loved the game GoldenEye, I hadn't seen one single Bond film at that time. I just liked blowing stuff up. I was familiar with the series and even with some of the characters, but I just didn't have the understanding or the appreciation for the films I have now. It was years before I actually sat down to watch this one. And believe me, after the direction the series was going, let me tell you, this one is a huge breath of fresh air. It was a long time coming, but they finally found a way to reinvent the series. Despite all the new cast members and all the large-scale action scenes, it once again feels like a spy film. 007 was back, at least for a little while. The film opens with James Bond, played of course by Pierce Brosnan, running across a dam in the middle of the USSR, about to invade a weapons facility. He bungees off the dam, and right away it brings up fond memories of the N64 video game. I remember watching this and going, oh yeah, I did that. He drops in on a few of our Russian friends and rendezvous with Agent Trevelyan, or Agent 006, played by Sean Bean, who would later go on to play Boromir in The Lord of the Rings.
Why not use this ring? Long has my father, the steward of Gondor, kept the forces of Mordor at bay. By the blood of our people are your lands kept safe.
Together they go to blow up the facility, with Bond setting up the explosives. They get surrounded by guards, where we meet the film's first villain, General Oramov. They hold Trevelyan hostage for a little while, then shoot him point blank, which is kind of misleading given what happens later on. Bond, of course, escapes the shootout and runs for a plane which careens off of a cliff. Bond dies after the plane actually climbs on in mid-fall and regains control of the plane as the weapons facility goes up in flames. Bam! Titles. How's that for a Bond opening? Right away I'm thinking, welcome back, Bond. Welcome back. So we end up 9 years later, which isn't very typical for a Bond film. Usually the main film is an extension of the prologue, where Bond in his trademark Aston Martin DB5 takes an MI6 evaluator out for a spin and engages in a race with Xenia Onatopp, another eventual villain that Bond is currently pursuing. Bond tracks Onatopp to a casino where he beats her at cards and then engages her in some pretty obvious sexual innuendos.
How do you take it?
Straight up, with a twist. Xenia Sergeyevna Onatopp.
Onatopp?
Onatopp.
Knows to drop in occasionally. Shoot in and out.
We follow Onatopp and her lover, an unnamed admiral, who she kills by having sex with him. What a way to go. Bond stumbles across the Admiral's dead body as Onatopp kills a couple of pilots and escapes in a helicopter. We then go to Russia, where we meet the film's heroine, a humble computer programmer named Natalia Semenova, and a quirky hacker, Boris Grushenko.
You wouldn't know a woman if one came up and sat on his head.
He's an interesting character to watch. He has this nervous twitch he does with his pen, and his dialogue's hilarious.
Better luck next time. Slugheads. Bang! Gun! I am invincible!
Onatopp arrives with General Oronov, shoots everyone in the bunker dead, with the exception of Natalia, who survives somehow, and steals the control disk for a pair of GoldenEye satellite weapons, which they used to obliterate the fort. We're introduced to the new Miss Moneypenny, played this time by Samantha Bond. She's a fine actress, but I'm sure everyone noticed that her real last name is Bond. Coincidence? Actually, she gets the upper hand in their little flirtatious conversation.
You may all find this crushing, 007. But I don't sit at home every night praying for some international incident so I can run down here all dressed up to impress James Bond.
She's got a little zing to her. Again, she's no Lois Maxwell, but not a bad casting choice. Then we meet the new M, played by the more than capable Judi Dench. Back in the days of Bernard Lee, M was a respectable character, and in many ways compassionate. Remember all the way back to Dr. No?
Since I've been head of MI7, there's been a 40% drop in 00 operative casualties, and I want it to stay that way.
Dench is the anti-Lee. She's the complete opposite. If anything, she wears the pants of this operation. She tells Bond right off the bat,
"You're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, a relic of the Cold War, whose boyish charms, though wasted on me, obviously appeal to that young woman I sent out to evaluate you."
It's a very respectable performance, but I have to point out here the subtle irony of what's going on. By the time GoldenEye came out, the Cold War had ended and the Soviet Union was dissolved. Studios were afraid to bring the Bond series back because they didn't think the character would be relevant to the world in the 90s. And yeah, this movie is a far cry from the days of Ernst Blofeld. But when you look at how both Moneypenny and M regard him, they're basically acknowledging this. It's like breaking the fourth wall, but not really. I know it's the film's way of bringing the character up to speed, but it feels like the movie itself is just refusing to take any of Bond's bullshit. It's a big shift from the way Timothy Dalton portrayed the character in the 80s. Both actors played the character with confidence, but in this one, Bond's back to being the complacent playboy, and no one's biting. What's the fun of a James Bond film if Bond isn't being a sexist, male-chauvinist pig? And after she gives him a scolding, she tells him,
"Come back alive."
So she's basically the strict schoolteacher who has the best intentions at heart. Now here's a pleasant surprise. After all these years, we do have one sole survivor of the Bond franchise. Bond might be a relic of the Cold War, but Desmond Llewellyn is the true testament of the series, returning once again as Q. He doesn't quite sound as good. The years haven't been kind to him.
Right, now pay attention, 007. First, your new car. BMW. Agile 5 forward gears, all points radar.
But it's still fun to watch him pass off some nifty equipment, namely a BMW Z3 with all the trimmings.
Oh, grow up, 007.
They all said the pen was mightier than the sword.
Thanks to me, they were right.
Next, Bond goes to St. Petersburg, where he meets with CIA agent Jack Wade, played by Bond alumnus Joe Don Baker. If you recall, the last time we saw him, he was getting himself killed as a crazed Napoleon enthusiast in The Living Daylights. I hate that movie. Natalia, also in St. Petersburg, contacts Boris, who tells her to meet him in a church. She goes to meet our jittery token Russian when she realizes she's been set up and gets headed off by Onatopp. Bond goes to meet an old rival, one we've never met before, so it must have been a really long 9 years, Valentin Zukovsky, played by Robbie Coltrane.
Shouldn't have said that. No more questions. Don't ask any more questions. That's top secret, that is.
It turns out that Bond wants to use Valentin in order to arrange a meeting with the main villain, Janice, who Onatopp, Oronov, and Boris all work for. At his hotel, Bond goes for a swim when he's met by a very voluptuous, altogether horny Onatopp. He gets the upper hand and forces her to drive him to a graveyard where he discovers that Janice is actually, here's a minor spoiler alert, his old friend Travelin. Travelin, who faked his death back at the weapons facility, established the Janice crime syndicate so that he could avenge his parents' death, which he blames Britain for.
What's the matter, James? No glib remark? No pithy comeback?
After Travelin talks his ear off, Bond gets shot with a tranquilizer dart and wakes up aboard a downed helicopter. With Natalia as his alarm clock. The helicopter launches a pair of homing missiles, which incidentally are aimed for them. Bond and Natalia get to safety and are immediately caught by the enemy. Again. In a prison facility, they get interrogated by Ourumov, then make their daring escape as the guards fire away. Ourumov takes Natalia as his hostage, while James boards a tank and starts to get chased. What follows is your typical Bond chase scene with a little destructive twist. Ourumov regroups with Onatop and they board a train that looks like it came from Easter Island. On board, Trevelyan tries to get fresh with Natalia, but it turns out she likes her men on the not burnt side, as James decides to play chicken with the train. Trevelyan once again attempts to trap our heroes when Bond uses another one of Q's nifty gadgets. A laser this time. What, did he visit the set of Moonraker? And didn't Trevelyan used to work on the same side? He had to have known Q. Don't you think a criminal mastermind would account for Q's gadgets in his plan to stop 007? So Natalia and Bond meet up with Wade, where they trade in their slick BMW for this piece of shit. Seriously? I say fuck the mission. Keep the car. The bad guys are probably thousands of miles away anyway. Well, of course, they pursue the villains, traveling to an exotic tropical jungle where they're shot down by a missile. Bond wakes up and immediately gets attacked by an oversexed and over-the-top Onatop. Bond manages to tie her to an approaching helicopter where she gets caught, appropriately enough, between the limbs of a tree.
She always did enjoy a good squeeze.
Trevelyan's satellite rises like a big erect cock out of the water, and James is pursued by some gunmen. They get captured, again, when Boris, in trying to reactivate the GoldenEye satellite that Natalia disarmed, does his little twitchy pen thing. Of course, the pen in question is one of Q's gadgets, and he ends up blowing up the whole base. Next, Trevelyan and Bond play a little game of cat and mouse, which results in the two of them dangling from the satellite dish. Natalia comes in to save the day, Trevelyan's base is blown up, and Boris, as we find out, is not invincible. And that's the very satisfying Bond 17. I mean, wow. I like this one a lot. I mean, it was the mid-90s, so you really can't expect them to keep making these films the old way. It would be like asking George Lucas to make a new Star Wars film using stop-motion miniatures and puppets. It's not going to happen. It probably enraged a lot of fans that it used a little CG and had a little more pep to it. But it went back to the things that made the older, classic Bond films so entertaining. It had great villains, memorable characters, and a plot. Oh my God, ladies and gentlemen, when was the last time a James Bond film had a story that didn't involve going to 30 countries? Yes, they travel, but the locations actually serve to fit the story, and it works. It gels together very well, and after a decade of some pretty lackluster installments, this one finally returned to form. Now let's talk about Pierce Brosnan. Of all the Bonds, Brosnan probably showed the least amount of growth between films, and he did 4 of them. The Bond he played in GoldenEye was the Bond we would see for the rest of his run as the character. But seriously, I think Brosnan was born to play the role. Now calm down, I'm not saying he's necessarily better than Sean Connery or even Roger Moore. It's evident that he was inspired by those performances, though, and he brought elements of both actors to the table. Dalton just tried to take 007 to a very intense place, and while down the road we see a little bit of that as well, it's all dictated by the story. GoldenEye feels like a very heavy film because it has a pretty serious backstory, and it deals with a villain who betrays his country. But you can tell they also had fun with it. Brosnan is fun, he's slick, he's suave, and he's playful. All the things James Bond should be. And he's not a sly little pig either. You don't see him undressing ladies' skirts or undoing someone's blouse, the blouse of a girl he just met 30 seconds ago. It's like I said way back in my first Bond reviews. He's a playboy when he wants to be, but a secret agent when he has to be. And look at these villains. There are 4 major villains, not counting Valentine. You've got Boris, the fidgety token Russian motherfucker, Onatop, who fucks her enemies to death, while Onatop, ha ha ha. Ourumov, not as memorable, but he's still got the face of a ruthless psychotic killer, and Trevelyan, played by a pretty recognizable actor who has this heavy backstory and betrays both his country and his friend. They aren't quite as comic booky as, say, Jaws or Oddjob, but they stand out because they all have those fun little quirks. I hate to say it because the film is so recent, but this one goes near the top of my list. Obviously, it's not as iconic as the Sean Connery films, but it had been a really long time since a Bond film allowed itself to be so much fun. Of course, the N64 game to this day still kicks major ass.